So going through the book of First Corinthians, if you were here, Paul is very specific. The whole letter, what Paul is doing is saying, okay, the church has these questions, or they have these problems, or there's kind of these areas that they need help, and then Paul is addressing those things. It's very specific. He's not talking in generic truths. He's even mentioning certain people and certain situations that he knows about, and he's bringing God's word to bear on those specific things for strength, for answers to the problems, for wisdom, for direction that they need. And so I was praying as I had kind of this free sermon just based on how the schedule worked out as we finished the series. And I was praying, okay, God, what do you have for your church? What would be a specific thing that might address some of the issues that we face or where we are today? And this is the core thing it's not the only thing, but this is a core thing that I felt God put on my heart for our church today. And that is about money. And I know that for some of you, if this is your first time at church, or you are like, I don't like coming to church, they always talk about money, I just gave you the reason not to come back again. And that's okay, because so much of our life concerns money. So much of our life concerns money. So much of our thoughts, what we think about, is about money. A lot of our plans are about money. A lot of our choices are about money. A lot of our goals have to do with money. A lot of our stresses have to do with money, right? I mean, even if you're like, I hate money, well, it's probably because you're stressed about it. A lot of our conflicts have to do with money. If you have any conflict in your marriage, one of the top things that creates conflict is money. A lot of the things that we think about, a lot of even how we decide our job and our career choices, or as you have kids or consider having kids, or as you think about the election that we just had and how much finances played into that, and the economy, and some of you are getting older, you think about retirement and think about buying a house, and so much of our life is connected to money. So much of our life is connected to money, which means this. It means if you are Christian, you can't understand life with God, life with Jesus, if you don't understand how that connects to money. Because if so much of our life, our plans, our goals, our thoughts, our stresses, our conflicts, our choices, our where we live and what we do for work, if so much of our life encompasses money, then we can't really think about, how do I walk with God? How do I be faithful to God? What does life with Jesus look like if we don't understand how that fits with money? Do you know that Jesus talked about money about 25% of his teaching? More than he talked about politics, more than he talked about lying, more than he talked about marriage, more than he talked about sexuality, more than he talked about heaven or hell or prayer or all sorts of things. Jesus talked a lot about money because it is such a big part of our life. It can fuel your faith. It can be a big part of the purpose and the community and the depth of your relationship with God and your Christian experience. It can be a big part of that, or it can be a big hindrance to that. It can be one of the main things that gets in the way of your joy and purpose and obedience to Jesus. And I told you, Jesus talks about this 25% of his teaching, so there's a lot that we could look at, but this story is really helpful that he gives. It's a helpful story to see where we easily go wrong with money and what will solve it, or what helps point the way forward for us. So let me read this story, this interaction that Jesus has with somebody, and then a parable that he tells, and then we will look at what we can learn from this. Someone from the crowd said to him, to Jesus, "Teacher," and I just love this, "tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Just come up to Jesus, "Hey, tell my brother." So if you have something, you're like, "Jesus, my brother is not doing this." Okay, Jesus gets it. He's been asked a lot of those questions. "Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." "Friend," he said to him, "who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you?" He then told them this story, this parable. "Watch out and be on guard against all greed, because one's life is not in the abundance of his possessions." Then he told them a parable. A rich man's land was very productive. He thought to himself, "What should I do, since I don't have anywhere to store my crops? I will do this," he said. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones and store all my grain and my goods there. Then I'll say to myself, you have many goods stored up for many years. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourself. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life is demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? That's how it is with the one who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. End of parable. Let's ask this question. Where do we go wrong with our money? What's wrong with this man's use of his money? People come to Jesus, they're asking him this kind of life question, money question, this dispute that they're trying to solve. Then Jesus tells them a parable that broadens out as teaching for all of us, and it helps us understand where all of us are easily tempted to go wrong with money. And like the man in this parable, a lot of us ask money questions. He says, what should I do? And you've probably asked some money questions recently. Should I buy this? Should I save? Should I spend? How much should I put away? Should I invest in this stock? Should I make this choice? Should we buy the more expensive thing or the cheaper thing? Should we fix the car or buy a new one? You've probably asked yourself money questions. We often ask ourselves different questions. Should I switch jobs so I can get more money? Should I stay at home? Should I work from home? We've got a lot of money questions. You've probably asked some of those. And we want to get it right. I don't think anyone in here is like, you know what I want to do? I want to be stupid with my money. I don't think anybody feels that way, right? We want to get it right. We want to be wise with our money. And this story is so important because if I asked you, tell me about what it means to be a fool with money. If I said, hey, tell me what you think foolishness with money looks like. You'd probably come up with some things. Maybe it's making money dishonestly. Maybe it's spending a bunch of money on kind of dumb things. You know, you spend $10,000 on a beanie bag, beanie, whatever those things are called. What are those little beanie things? Is it beanie bags? Beanie babies, yeah. A beanie baby collection, Remember when those were big? Yeah. If you spend a lot of money on those, I'm sorry. Unless you bought the right one and then you sold it. But maybe you're like, oh, yeah, maybe that's stupid. Sometimes you hear about these people that have tens of thousands of dollars in some kind of collection, and it's like, okay, maybe that wasn't the best use of money. We went to Germany, and we wanted to go to, and I don't know if any of you are history buffs, but the Eagle's Nest, which was kind of Hitler's hideout. Okay, if you ever saw Band of Brothers, they go there at the end of it, and they raid it and all this stuff. But it was Hitler's hideout at the top of the mountain, this gorgeous, beautiful place. And we wanted to go there. Not because it was like a Nazi pilgrimage or something for us, but it was like we wanted to go see Hitler's hideout, right? I wouldn't be allowed to be a Nazi, even if I wanted to, which I don't, but just, I'm Puerto Rican, so they wouldn't let me in, okay? So, this is getting off track. All right. New sermon topic, racism and why Nazis are bad, okay? We wanted to go to the top of the Eagle's Nest, okay? So we paid, it was like a couple $100, take this thing all the way up to the top. Completely foggy. Couldn't see a thing. Not a thing. And it's supposed to be this gorgeous view. Couldn't see a thing. And then there wasn't even anything up there. We thought there's like a museum or just a coffee shop. And I don't even think Hitler got coffee there. It was nothing. It was just a coffee shop and literally couldn't see a thing. I was like, this was a waste of money. I want that money back. I want the money back and I hate Hitler. Those were the two things that confirmed, There's probably dumb things you've spent money on before, right? You've probably spent money on dumb things. You probably at least have a category in your mind of this is a foolish use of money, not a great way to use money. But this story is really helpful because if I asked you, tell me about what it means to be a fool with money, you wouldn't say this. If I asked you, tell me about money foolishness, we would not say what happens in this story. God calls this person a fool. But if I said, what's money foolishness? None of us, I don't believe, would come up with this story. In fact, this might be our slogan for money wisdom. You have many goods stored up for many years. Take it easy, eat, drink, enjoy yourself. What should we do with our money? What's money wisdom? We should save so that we've got many years saved up so we can take it easy. They could just cut and paste this on most retirement websites. Save your money, take it easy, store things up, eat, drink, enjoy yourself. That is his definition of money wisdom. And God shows up and says, you are a fool. So I want us just to wrestle with that for a second and go, what we think is money foolishness and what the Bible says money foolishness are very different. Here's what that means. It means much of our instincts about money are wrong. Much of the way that we've been raised, if you had parents that taught you about money, may very well be wrong. Much of what you studied in school or much of what your financial advisors told you might be wrong and foolish. So where did he go wrong with money? When we look at that story, we might say, that's my goals. That's my financial plan. That's what I want. That's what I desire. What this guy had, take it easy, eat, drink, store it for yourself, relax. That is my financial statement. And God shows up and says, you're a fool. It's a bad time in the story when God shows up and the first thing he says is, you're an idiot. Right? I mean, all of us probably at some point be like, God, would you speak to me? God, would you speak to me? And God's like, yes, I will speak to you. You're really stupid. And you're like, that's not what I wanted to hear. Where did he go wrong? There's at least two things that we can see. The first is he doesn't listen to God. Doesn't listen to God. It says this, he thought to himself, what should I do? Then I'll say to myself. So what's he doing? He's not listening to God. He's talking to himself. He's listening to himself. He's counseling and advising to himself. He is not saying, what does God say I should do with my money? That's the first place he gets it wrong. That's the first place that we get it wrong. And it might feel harsh to us that God shows up to this man that looks wise with his money to us, and God shows up and calls him an idiot. But here's the thing. God has already spoken. God has already spoken and said what he should do with his money. This man is saying, what should I do? And let me talk to myself and let me think to myself. But God has already said what he should do. The Old Testament was very clear on what God's people were to do with their money. They were called to give a tithe, 10% of their money, and then even beyond that to additional things. This man doesn't consider any of that. This man doesn't think about any of that. The Bible says this. The Bible says in the Old Testament that not to tithe is to rob God. So that's why even when we read this story, it can seem like, why is God being kind of harsh with him? This is just a guy working hard. He didn't earn his money dishonestly. He worked hard. He prospered. He saved. And now he's just kind of enjoying. What's wrong with that? Well, it's because he is not obeying God. Remember, the story begins with somebody asking Jesus a question. Hey, can you tell my brother to give the inheritance? And Jesus says, and Jesus kind of often does this, where he'll ask a question like, hey, who are you to call, why do you think I'm good? And obviously Jesus is good, but he kind of asks these testing questions. And here he says, hey, who made me the judge or arbitrator over you? Now, the reality is Jesus is the judge. Jesus is the one that can make the decisions, right? And he's the one that can make the decisions with our money. This man ignored what God said about money. He ignored what God had revealed in the Bible. And then even as he's considering a specific situation, he's not saying, what does God say? What does God say? Let me try to remind myself. Oh yeah, that's what God said. He's not doing that. He's not saying, Jesus, you're the judge with my money. God, you're the judge with my money. Tell me what to do with my money. Help me to see what your word revealed I'm supposed to do. He's not doing that. He is asking himself what he should do. So where do we go wrong with our money? The first is this. We don't listen to God. So we're not doing a raise your hand test, but ask yourself, when you think about money, does what decides your money choices and plans and decisions, does it come from, I am obeying what God says. I'm seeking to take all of my money and say, God, what do you say? Is that what controls it? Are you saying, here's my bank account, here's my credit card statement, here's everything I have? Jesus, you are the judge. I trust you because you're better than I am. I trust you because you know you're wiser than me when it comes to money. What do I do? And you open his word and you listen. Is that what you're doing? That's the first place we go wrong with money. And then the second is related, but that he is self-focused with his money. This story, it's just a short little story, but look how many times he's really kind of inside of himself. He thought to himself, what should I do? I, my, I, myself, talking to himself, yourself. He's about a dozen times focused on himself. He's self-focused. So second place that we go wrong with our money is we are self-focused. We believe this money came from me, this money is for me, and thus it's just up to me how it's used and when it's used and where it's used. It's from me. It's my own hard work. It's my own stuff that made it. Nobody gave me a handout. It's from me. Forgetting God made you. God put you on this earth. God gave you the gifts and skills and experiences that you have. Think it's from me, and we think it's for me. This man is self-focused. He's not thinking about God. He's not even thinking about other people. He's thinking about himself. So where do we go wrong with our money? Well, it's that we are not considering or listening to God, and we are focused on ourselves. And you have to ask yourself, is my money controlled? Does my money, and just be honest with it, right? Because no one's testing you. Is my money radically controlled by God? Is my money radically controlled by God? That God's the center of how I think about my money, how I use my money, how I plan my money, whether I spend it or save it. It's God-focused and centered. That's where we go wrong with our money. But here's another question. Because I think most of us would be able to look at that a little bit and go, yeah, I'm probably more like that guy than unlike that guy. Or at least I'd like to be like that guy. That guy's my hero. I want big barns, and I cannot lie. I like big barns, and I cannot lie. Why do we go wrong with our money? That's another question. Why? Why do we go wrong with our money? Where does this come from? Where does this mentality come from? Not listening to God, focused on ourselves. Why do we go wrong with our money? Even if you feel kind of stuck with your money right now, and even if, listen, maybe you've even been to church before, maybe you've even heard me talk about this before, and you go, yeah, I know I want to kind of handle my money differently, but I just don't feel like I can. Why? What's the grip on our hearts? What is it? Why is it so powerful? And Jesus tells us in this story. He says, because it's not just money. Money is not just money. It's like a god. Look what Jesus says. He says, one's life is not in the abundance of his possessions. See, we look at money as a source of life. That's the problem. We look at money as a source of life. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that just our actual physical existence. Life is that thing which you consider to be what fulfills and satisfies and brings happiness and contentment. And Jesus is saying, here's why money is so powerful. Your view of what life is connected to money. Now, here's where this broadens, because this is different for all of us. You might believe that life is being accepted by other people. You might believe that life and what brings joy and happiness and contentment is if I get acceptance from others. But you know what can give you that? Money. You know what can give you acceptance from people and people liking you? If you've got a few of those boats. Be like, hey, want to hang out with me? I want to hang out with your boat, so I guess yes. Right? If for you, acceptance is life. Friendship is life. Money can give you that. When people say money can't buy you happiness, they're only kind of right. Because money can buy you a lot of the things that give us what our definition of happiness is. If it's friendship and having friends to come over and hang out on boats, money can give you that life. Maybe it's just comfort, that you don't want to have to worry about anything. You want all the pleasures of everything, right? You don't want to ever have to do much hard work. You don't want to have to ever mow your own lawn, or you don't want to have to clean your own house. You don't want to have to even go to the store. You want everything just instant Amazon. You just want plush slippers and a comfy bed, and I'm not saying all those things are evil and sinful. I'm just saying maybe comfort in a life where it's just, man, this is easy. Maybe that's life to you. Money can give you that. Maybe it's not those things. Maybe it's security. Maybe like some of you, I grew up poor. I've stood in food stamp lines before. And maybe for some of you, it's security and going, I never want to have to do that again. Money is, I will be safe. I will be stable. I will have refuge. I'll never have to fear. I'll never have to worry. And security to you is life. Man, if I can know I'm safe, that will be life. Money can give you that. Maybe it's just status and identity. That money allows you to feel like I am somebody. I'm not a loser. I'm not somebody that never made it. I'm not somebody that, and again, maybe that's because you've always been successful and you had parents that were successful, or maybe it's because you came from nothing and pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, and money is the thing that goes, I'm somebody. I'm not a loser. Gives you identity, gives you status, significance. Money can give you life, which is why some of us spend a lot of it, and why some of us save a lot of it. It's why some of us are in a lot of debt. America's in tons of debt, not just as a country, obviously that too, but as its people, we're in so much debt. It's why some of us are scared of money, and why some of us love just money is such a delight to us, because it is life. And it's even why, for some of you, if you're like, man, I'm trying to be a good Christian, and I tithe, and some of us might even be doing the thing that God calls us to do, and yet feel a bitterness over it. We're not cheerful or joyful givers, because we feel like God's taking a portion of our life away. Fine, I'll do what you say, but I don't like it. See, money is the number one false version of life. Our church name is True Life. Money is the number one false version of life. Jesus says, I offer life. And money says, no, I offer life. Which is why, in another place, Jesus makes this statement, which he doesn't say about anything else. But he says, no servant can serve two masters, since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Jesus draws a line in the sand, more defined, more clear, more convicting with money and God than he does with anything else, because it is the number one competitor to God in our life. What else could be a better substitute? What else could say, I will give you whatever you want. I will provide for you. I will love you. I will give you community. I will give you purpose. I will give you significance. I will give you meaning. I will give you satisfaction. God, money. That's why Jesus draws a line in the sand. It's why it's so stark. I put it like this so you can just see it. It's either or. I want you to face the either or that Jesus says. It's either I hate and despise God, or I love and devoted to money. Or I love and am devoted to God, or I hate and despise money. So here's what you got to do. You have to ask yourself, do I hate and despise money? If you don't hate and despise money, then that means you do not love and are devoted to God. Can we say, yes, I hate and despise money? If we can't, then we actually, in truth, hate and despise God and love and are devoted to money. It can't be both. That's Jesus' words. Don't get mad at me if you're like, I knew it. The church says. No, Jesus says. I just made a graph. But Jesus said it. This is why money is so powerful. Jesus sees this. He knows this. And he wants to free us from that. He cares about that. You think about this. If Jesus says, I give you life, and money says, I give you life. Now, Jesus is good and loves you. So he doesn't want you to be trapped by the deception of money that's offering something false. He loves you, so he says, no, don't. He wants to free us from that. He cares about you. So any conviction or any command or any call that God gives about our money isn't because he's trying to hurt you. It's because he's trying to free us from the false deception that is offered to us by the life that money proposes. So what does it look like then to live wisely with our money? If this man was a fool, if this guy, Jesus says, this guy's an idiot, he's a fool, don't use your money like this, and yet we're so prone to admire this man, what is money wisdom? What does it look like to live with wisdom in our money? And there's two things that we see here. The first is that at the beginning, Jesus says, watch out and be on guard against all greed. Watch out and be on guard. That's an interesting preface to the story, because there's other times that the Bible will use that language. It'll say watch out or be on guard, but it doesn't say it with everything. Like usually we're not told watch out that you don't commit adultery, because you kind of know if you're committing adultery. No one's like, oh, how'd that happen? Well, there's some steps that got you there. But watch out and be on guard means you might end up a greedy person and not even realize it. You might end up a person that is using your money foolishly, like this man who was caught off guard, where God says, you're a fool, and you thought you were wise. Watch out. Be on guard. Do you know, I heard another pastor say it once years ago, and then I realized it was true in my own experience also, and it has proved true throughout. I've had people, as a pastor, I've had people confess to me every imaginable thing that you could think of. Whether that's sexual infidelity, things that have happened to them, abortion, murder, robbing, thieving, criminal activity, dishonesty, gossip. I mean, I've had people confess to me, hey, I struggle with this, or I've done this. Could God forgive me? I've had people confess pretty much anything you could imagine. I don't know if I've had anyone ever confess to me, I'm a greedy person. And yet, the Bible says this is a huge issue for most of us. What does that mean then? Well, it means that Jesus knows what he's talking about when he says, watch out and be on guard. Because it means this is so easy to become a part of our life that we don't even think it's a problem. We think, hey, I need to confess to you this sin, and we don't even realize, do you understand actually your biggest sin is this? Jesus talks about it so often, and often it's prefaced with the like, hey, this is probably an issue, and yet most of us don't think it's an issue, which just shows how big of an issue it is. Watch out. Part of what it looks like to live with wisdom with our money is to be on guard and to watch out. Do you know that this is just a small statistic, but only 13% of evangelicals, so not just the country, but evangelicals, which usually means people that say, I believe the Bible, I believe Jesus is God, just kind of classic Christianity. Only 13% of evangelicals tithe. That's give a 10% of their money, which is what the Old Testament tells us to do. Half give away less than 1%. That shows people are not watching out or on guard. That shows something's really off. That's just the statistics help us see something is off. So how do you watch out and be on guard? Well, I think there's at least two ways, okay? The first, well, maybe there's three ways. The first is one time I read this book on anger, and one of the chapters, it said, this is all it said. It said, you have an anger problem. That was it. And it was just saying, okay, just kind of understanding that, okay, I have an issue is one of the steps, right? I think one of the ways you watch out is you just need to come to grips with, I have a money issue. I'm greedy. Second thing is, in the Old Testament, we're instructed, God's people are instructed to tithe 10% of their money and then beyond for other things. Well, one of the ways that you can watch out is by just saying, I'm gonna start there. I'm gonna commit to that. Can you be greedy and give 10% of your money? Absolutely. Can you be extremely generous and give 3% of your money? Sure, depending on your life situation, although it would be rare and it wouldn't match up with the statistics that we see happening, where everybody is the exception, right? So that is one of the ways to just say, I'm going to start where God's people in the Old Testament were commanded. That will at least help me as a baseline know I'm probably on the right track. But you know, and maybe some of you are thinking this, when you come to the New Testament, like even right here, Jesus doesn't say, this idiot, he should have given 10% of his money. That's not what happens in the New Testament. You're not given these specific percentages. What you're given is more heart-directed things that work on our heart. And so I think one of the second ways that you can watch out is to ask yourself heart questions. Now, the hard part with this is it's less objective, but if you can be honest between yourself and God and ask yourself some heart questions, you may be able to move towards some greater self-reflection and honesty that helps you avoid self-deception. So here's a handful of questions that you should ask yourself. These are just from the Bible. These are from 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 mainly, and then this passage and some other money. So these are just like basically direct quotes rephrased into a question from the Bible. These are not my own things. Does my giving show that I hate money? So if you ask that question, does my giving, my financial generosity, does that show that I hate money? What does my spending show that I treasure? If someone looked at your statements and they just percentage-wise said, okay, you give 10% of your money to housing, or you give 15% of your money to groceries, or you give 40% of your money to this, or 10% to entertainment, what would your giving show that you love, that you treasure, that you value? Am I giving first to God before anything else? A lot of these, like I said, come from 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. Do I overflow with a wealth of generosity? That's a statement from 2 Corinthians. Do I overflow with a wealth of generosity? Would that describe you? Do I abound in giving? Do I give beyond my means? That doesn't mean you should go into debt. What it means is whatever it is that you think, this is all I can do, the Bible actually says, no, we give beyond that. We give sacrificially. Do I beg? I don't think I've ever experienced anyone that's done this, but the Bible says that a whole church did this. Do I beg for the privilege of giving? Please talk about money. When can we give? When? Please, please. I've never had anyone do that. Please, here's what I beg. Make it so I can't say that anymore. Make it so that the next time I want to say that as a joke, that you're like, no, you can't say that, because actually that one time I begged that I could give. But then you actually have to give, right? Does my giving prove my love? If someone wanted to prove that you loved God and loved his church, would your giving prove that? Our giving, our spending proves what we love, right? You say, hey, let me prove that I love this girl I'm going to ask to marry me. I'm going to buy her this nice ring. Let me prove that I love my kids. I'm going to buy them this. Let me prove that I love skiing. I'm going to buy this. Let me prove that I love. Does your giving prove your love for God, for the church? Would people say my giving is excelling, that it's excellent? Paul tells the church, you're excellent at these things, you're excellent at these things. Be excellent in giving. Some of you are awesome at a lot of different things. You're excellent in your jobs. You're excellent in your hobbies. You can build things. You can tell all the stats, various sports. You can make wreaths. You can cook things. You're excellent in a lot of things. Are you excellent in giving? And then the final one is, does my giving reflect my salvation by Jesus? Meaning that Jesus poured out everything to save us. He gave us infinite grace that we don't deserve at all. He did it joyfully. He wanted to do that. He wanted to save us. He did it graciously. We didn't earn it, deserve it, but he said, I graciously save you. He did it sacrificially. It cost him everything to save us. He gave his life. He didn't give a tenth of his blood. He gave his life. He gave everything to save us. Does my giving reflect what I know I've received from Jesus? So I think these questions, this is how the Bible motivates us towards giving and generosity. In the New Testament particularly. It says these kinds of things. It doesn't say 10%, the end. It says, what about this? Does this prove your love? Are you abounding? Are you excelling? Are you hating money? That's the first way that we can live wisely with our money, is to watch out. To watch out. To be on guard. And then secondly, is to be, as the parable ends, Jesus gives his kind of final point, is that we are to be rich toward God. So Jesus says, this man's an idiot. Don't be the idiot. Instead, be rich toward God. That's the point. Rich toward God. Now, what does that mean? Rich toward God. We don't use that. We don't use that kind of phrasing at all, right? You don't say, even if something you love, if you love skiing, since I mentioned that earlier, you don't say, I'm rich towards skiing. We don't say that. That's kind of a weird phrasing. But it just means where you direct your riches towards, where you direct your wealth towards, where you direct your money, your resources towards. That's what it means. To be rich, to direct your riches towards God. Now, even that, though, can be kind of weird because you're saying, how do I direct my riches towards God? We used to, as a church, we don't do this anymore, but we used to have kind of offering baskets up front. I've shared this before. We used to have offering baskets up front. People could put money in there, checks in there. Everybody gives online, so that's why we kind of, one of the reasons we stopped doing that. But my kids, when they were younger, they'd have their allowance, and they would tithe out of their allowance, and they'd come and we would say, hey, kind of give your money for Jesus in the basket, so they'd come and put it there. But then they asked one time, like, well, how does Jesus get the money? Does it like get sucked up to, like, well, no, that would be really cool though. I bet we'd get people to give a lot more if all of a sudden, we'd get some tubes, I guess, or something, and just, like at the bank, they've got that thing. But that's not what it means when we say it goes towards God. It's not that God, actually collects it, but it goes towards the things. Rich towards God means it is rich towards the things that God has said it's supposed to go to, or rich towards the things that God cares about. Rich towards God doesn't just mean we hand God a dollar bill because God's not physically here. So it means rich towards the things that God has said that he loves and that he cares about and that he values and that he is doing. That's what it means. What is that? In the Old Testament, they were required to give their tithes to the priests and the temple for the worship of God's people. And all the center, that was the center of their life. For us, the main thing that God is doing, the main institution or things he has established here is the church. The church is the only thing that Jesus has said, this is my bride. This is my bride. The church is the only thing that God says, this is my family. This is my household. This is the only thing that God calls his household, his family. The church is the only thing that Jesus said he was going to build. And Jesus said, I will build my church. The church is God's family. It's Jesus' bride. It is his kingdom society that's an alternate society within our society, pushing back darkness in a world that is dark, living with wisdom in a world that's insane. It is, the Bible says, a pillar and buttress of truth, that it shows the truth and glory of God to the world around us. The church is the place where Jesus gives life, where he gives family, where he gives wisdom and guidance and strengthening, where we experience all the different elements of what it means to be a kingdom community set apart with Jesus as king. There's nothing greater than God's church. It is what he said he builds and establishes. So to be rich toward God must have a big part of that be what Jesus said he loves and is building is his church. Now, let me be even more specific here about what this means and looks like for us. Because, like in 1 Corinthians, I wanted to just be really practical for us as a church. What does this mean? What is God leading us to? If we say, all right, we want to be careful with our money and watch out, and we want to be rich towards God. I don't want to leave it there in abstract, but be very specific, okay? So our church has existed for about 11 years now. It's existed for about 11 years in a lot of different iterations. COVID changed where we were meeting and location and all sorts of things, but our church has existed for 11 years. We're not a baby church. We're also not a fully mature church. If you have an 11-year-old, you know kind of what we're like, okay? So our church is 11 years old. And it is time for us as a church to move towards some greater permanence, to move towards some deeper permanence and move towards a building. We had an opportunity recently where I went and looked at a building, and it was for sale for $3.5 million, another church building, and we couldn't do that. Couldn't do that because we don't have the money for that. Specifically, we don't have a down payment for that. And the reality is there is just not a lot of options to have a building in Arvada or in this area. There's just not. There's a handful of churches that exist. A lot of them are dying. And so sometimes those buildings come available, like this one. They're for sale, and developers want to buy them. There's another church building currently for sale that's for sale for I think $7.5 million. Okay, we don't have that money. That will be probably knocked down and made into a housing development, like another church building was recent or is in process over on I think Ward is where it is. That I had contacted even 4 years ago about. Okay, so there's not a lot of options. You know, we have recently contacted over 30 different locations, contacting them, asking them if we could meet there, just to lease there. And every single one has said no. Those are basically every school in the area, event center, I don't know, a handful of other, every single place has said no. There's one place, I take it back, one elementary school that's really outside of where we want to be, that if we were kicked out of here tomorrow, that's where we would probably go. And it would be unideal, and you'd probably be mad about it. And I would too. But I'd be joyful in the Lord. I have to add that Christian language to it. I'd be furious and joyful. It's time for us as a church to be able to say, what is the next thing that God has for us? And that means we have to be ready with a down payment when a building becomes available. We have to be ready. You know, for those of you that have bought a house, you can't say, hey, there's this awesome house. Let me see if I can get it. Oh, wait, I don't have any money. You can't do that, right? Even if you could make the monthly payments. You have to be ready with a down payment before something becomes available. And we had an opportunity that we couldn't get. Part of that's because we didn't have a down payment to be able to do that. So we have to be ready as a church for when a building becomes available. It might be a year from now. It might be 2 years from now. I hope it's sooner than later. But we have to be ready when a building becomes available so we can actually move on it. No bank will take us seriously. No church will take us seriously. No building that's for sale will take us seriously if we say, hey, we'll get some money. Just give us some time. Right? Imagine doing that if you were going to go buy a house. I'm going to put my offer in. Okay, but don't look at my accounts. I just trust me, right? That wouldn't happen. So we need to be ready to be able to move on a building. What that means for us is that we need to be in a position to be able to buy a building that's going to be several $1 million. So that means, here's the number that I'm asking our church to raise, $400,000. And that would get us about a 20% down on $3 million building, couple $1 million, $2.5 million with money that we already have in savings. Okay? We've done good as a church over the years of saving money through various end of year giving focuses that we do, as well as initial fundraising that I did when we first planted the church. So that would put us in a position to probably buy a $2.5, $3 million building, which would be good. Okay, that would be phase one. Phase two would be this thing needs a boiler or a roof or all sorts of other things that kind of come up. But we need to be in a position to just put a down payment down. And so what that means is we need to be able to raise $400,000. So please lock the doors in the back. No, I'm just kidding. If anyone is a good boat thief, I'm just kidding. Just joking. Let me give you a few reasons why that's important for us. One of them is we need to be free from the whims of landlords and those that own the building. Okay, the reason that we are in this building is because of COVID. We got kicked out of a school. Okay, we need to be free from the whims of the government saying you can't meet, you can meet. We need to be free from the whims of, one of the places I just saw an email today back that was saying, yeah, you can't meet here because we want to use our school for the arts, and we're partnering with the city to be able to use the auditorium and stuff on the weekend. So we need to be free from the whims of a world around us that doesn't prioritize church as an important thing. Like, yeah, we really would love a church to meet in our school. We need to be free from I'm telling you, over 30 different places that we've contacted have all said no. So we need to be free from the control of the lack of options that are out there. We need to be able to we're maxing out our kids' space. I love that we need a bigger stage. I love that we have a bunch of different babies, but our choice is either more birth control or a building. And I think building is better. And by the way, I don't know, maybe we can cut this out of the recording. Sermon over. Okay, so the kids meet in a bar. I don't know if you know that, but if you look back, it says bar, and we put pipe and drape around the bar, but sometimes they are taking shots of Jack, You signed something probably when you checked them in. So they literally are meeting in a bar. That's where the kids are meeting, okay? So it's ghetto. It's not and yet we have more kids right now than adults when we started the church. So we are growing, and we want to keep growing. We want there to be tons and tons and tons and tons of babies. That's a biblical priority. And they're all alcoholics. So we need to start an alcoholics ministry also. So we need money for that. We're maxing out the kid space. And for those of you that kind of have been in the church for a while, and maybe you didn't have kids, and then you had kids, that's, you're a little more comfortable with that. You're like, okay, that's fine. I get that our church meets in a boat dealership. But especially for new people that maybe are, and maybe that's some of you today, but you're checking out church, and you're like, oh, kids meet in a bar? I knew this church was stupid, right? It's kind of hey, let's drive into this barbed wire fence and then pull up, and then it's all right. At least the kids' ministry will be safe. Oh, it's right under the bar sign? Okay. It's definitely not very hospitable experience. And I love you all. I'm glad you're all here. But there's a lot of people in our city that need Jesus. And we want to see more of them come to know Jesus. And we want to see more families brought back. I've shared these stats with you before, but the amount of de-churched people, 40 million people that are de-churched in the last couple decades. That means people that say, I'm not going to church anymore. I'm still a Christian. I still love God. I'm not going to church anymore. But most of those people say, I would come back to church if it was just a decent church community and could learn about Jesus. So there's a lot of opportunity out there to invite those people in. But we need to be a hospitable place. We need to be able to be a place that is hospitable to welcome people in. I want you to be able to invite your friends and neighbors and coworkers and people to church and not be like, oh, by the way, your kids, they might get a little tipsy. I want you to be able to invite your friends and not feel kind of embarrassed to bring them to a bar for their kids. It also would allow us to do things during the week. Your kids in 5 years are going to need space for a youth group. That's not going to be here. I promise you they don't want a bunch of teenagers playing on those boats. But we don't have access to anything during the week. Right? So we've rented out some other churches to use their space and had to pay them money and use their space. But we need to be able to have space during the week for all sorts of things that we could do. Whether that's the youth that will be here eventually, or it's for different events and conferences and things that we can do with the building. And also, it's a future legacy that we can hand off to multiple generations. We buy a building, we'll enjoy it, but our kids will enjoy it, our grandkids will enjoy it, great-grandkids will enjoy it. And even if it's, for some reason, True Life doesn't exist anymore, hopefully some other church enjoys it. It's buying a church building or a property that we can use as a church is something that has generational impact forever. It's something that isn't like where moths and rust destroy. It's not buying a boat that you make a couple good memories on and then it's gone. It's something that lasts for generations, for your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids and people that we don't even know yet, kids and grandkids. It allows us to do so much. And listen to me for a second. Truly, if you really think about it, in your heart of hearts, if you're a Christian, if you're not a Christian, I know I'm crazy and the money pastor, that's fine. But if you're a Christian, what better use of your money? Truly. What better use? I've spent money on a lot of things that I like and that are fun, that are great. I'm not saying that's bad. But really, what better use of your money? What better kingdom impact that goes the exact opposite against this than being able to say, let's have a home. Let's have a place that can impact generations. Let's be a part of being rich towards God with what he says matters most to him, his church, his people. So here's what this means. I know I'm going over, but that's just how it is. Here's what it means specifically, practically. Be rich towards God. This, I'm telling you, $400,000, I know that might to you sound ambitious or like I'm insane. It's more than ambitious. It's miraculous. I'm asking us to actually give miraculously. I'm asking us to give sacrificially, as Jesus gave to us. We will not be able to do this with pennies in your couch. We won't be able to do this with shaving off a couple Starbucks, okay, I'll not have Starbucks this week. This is sacrificial. This is, what are you willing to actually give up? This is, I'm willing to sacrifice. Listen, and I'm not trying to be weird or anything, but if your car broke down, you'd find a way to come up with the money to get yourself a car, right? You'd have to sacrifice, but you'd come up with the money. If you found out you had some bad diagnosis and you had some medical bill, you'd find a way to come up with that. You'd have to sacrifice some things, but so instead of the negative, the positive, we're going to have to sacrifice. But there is a way for us to say, I believe Jesus has sacrificed for me, and I will give. I will sacrifice. And maybe even just consider this guy's list. He talks about taking it easy, eating, drinking, enjoying himself. And he also talks about most of this comes from his savings, the things that he has stored up. I think that's probably what we have to think about in order to make this happen. Where am I taking it easy that I could actually take it more difficult in order to sacrifice? Where am I enjoying things that I could say I'm going to abstain from to sacrifice? But probably the bulk of us, in order to do this, it's going to actually be the goods that we have stored up. It's going to be selling a portion of your retirement. It's going to be cashing out some investments. It's going to be money you have in savings, saying, I'm going to trust God with that and give it. I know that's going to be for us. We can't shave this off the grocery budget. Can't be like, all right, how about a dozen eggs instead of 2? It's going to be, all right, we've got money in savings, and we're going to give into that. For most of us, that's what it's going to mean. And that starts to touch at money being life. That starts to touch at, but that's for. So here's my ask of you. $400,000. Now I'll tell you, miraculously, I'd love that to come in this week. That probably sounds, again, crazy. But I listen, 2 days ago, I talked to a pastor friend of mine, a church of a couple hundred people, and someone took him out to lunch and said, hey, here's $50,000 for the church. So I know all the money in the world is God's money. So my hope would be just a miracle of everybody's like, yeah, let's do this. I'm not asking you to buy me a building. I'm asking you to buy the church a building, right? Just so you know. It's not like, hey, I really want a building. This is for you and your kid. My kids don't go to the bar. We have a bar at home, you know. I would love that to come in this week, this month. It might take a year. Might take 2 years. That's up to you, you know. So, I mean, we need a building. It takes money to make that happen. Some of you, it might take some moving around, might take some time to make that happen. But I would love for it to happen up front. So we're just ready to go. And we can praise and thank God together. And I don't know, there's probably almost 100 people here. 100 people giving $5,000 each. That might sound like a lot to you. It's sacrificial. Well, that would be $500,000. And some of us obviously can't do that, can't even come close to that. But some of us might be able to give $50,000, $100,000. Maybe you have a rich Texas uncle that runs Chevron. Are they still in business? Or Texaco or whatever. Maybe they can write $1 million check. I don't know. I know we have some parents here today, and this is not your church, but I would also encourage you, help build a church for your grandkids. Help build a church for your grandkids. And if you are here and your parents aren't here, maybe reach out to your parents. I'm going to write a letter that I'll send out that I'd encourage you to give to your parents. Just to say, man, this is a generational thing. Build a church for you, your kids, your grandkids. Rich towards God. Last thing. What leads us to being rich towards God? How can we do that? Even right now, as maybe you hear some of this and you're like, I don't know. I'm just going to read the same thing that Jesus said, but show you the other side of it instead of the negative. When he says one's life is not in the abundance of his possessions, here's what that means. What is one's life in? Well, it's in Jesus. You see, we look to money for security, for happiness, for acceptance, for identity, for contentment. And what can actually free you is not saying, no, money's not that. That's not what will free you. It has to be actually finding your source of life in him. It's turning away from money as a source of life and turning to him and saying, I'm accepted because of you, Jesus. I have a family because of you. I know that my future is good and safe and secure because of you, and you're working all things for my good. My deepest joy and contentment is in you because you're the God that all the pleasures of the world are found in. I know that my identity is in you. I'm who I am because of who you say I am, not because of anything I've earned or done. My status and significance isn't based on my job, it's based on you. My refuge and my comfort in this world isn't just based on the creaturely comforts, but it's based on you and your presence with me. You are my life. See, when we know that and believe that and receive that, and if you're not a Christian, that is who Jesus is. That is who Jesus is. And that is what he offers to you. The more that you see that, the more your heart is freed from finding life in money. We're going to take communion in just a moment. If you are a Christian, we take communion every week, and there's little cups in the back. If you didn't grab one of those, you can grab that in just a moment. And we take communion, we are remembering that Jesus, this is such an awesome truth also, Jesus had everything. Jesus had barns fuller than this man's barns. He had wealth greater than this man's wealth. In heaven, perfect, and emptied it, not to spend on himself, but he emptied himself to give to us. He emptied himself to give life to us, to give forgiveness to us, to give family to us, to give the church to us. Jesus has poured out everything to save you, to welcome you into his family, to forgive you, and listen, to forgive you of all of our greed, to cleanse you of all of your sin, to make you new, and to give you life with him. So as you take communion, remember Jesus, thank him. Confess sin and receive his forgiveness. He forgives all of it. And then make a commitment to God. Make a commitment to God. For some of you, this act of generosity is repentance of a life of greed. For some of you, you're not greedy. It's just a continued act of generosity. But make a commitment to God. I'd even encourage you to write a number down. Let's pray, and we will sing a few songs in response. And I'll be in the back if anyone needs prayer for anything. Take communion when you're ready. Father, thank you for your goodness and your grace to us. Thank you that you have overflowed in a wealth of generosity to us. Thank you that you are so gracious. You've given everything to us. God, you gave us your Son. Didn't hold back anything. You gave us family and salvation, forgiveness, resurrection power, your Spirit. You are so generous to us. Let your generosity fill our hearts and control our lives. I pray, Lord, for just a miracle of generosity in your church. In your name, Jesus. Amen.